In the FBI's biggest investigation ever, every obstacle was hidden behind the encryption of a single iPhone. But unlocking that phone could destroy the privacy of 1 billion iPhone users forever. December 2nd, 2015, San Bernardino, California. What started as a routine office holiday party would end with 14 people dead, 22 wounded, and the most significant privacy battle in digital history. But this story isn't just about terrorism or investigation. It's about the moment when America had to choose absolute security or fundamental privacy. And at the center of it all was one device, an iPhone 5C that no one could crack. This is the story of how a single phone sparked the greatest crypto war of our time, pitting Apple against the FBI, privacy against security, and individual rights against government power. By the end, you'll understand why this case changed everything about how we think about digital privacy in the modern world. The morning of December 2nd seemed like any other at the Inland Regional Center. Syed Rizwan Farouk, a 28-year-old county health inspector, had been at the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health holiday training session. It was a typical office celebration, colleagues gathering, sharing food, discussing year-end projects. But at 10:58 a.m., everything changed. Farouk left the party abruptly, appearing agitated after what witnesses described as a heated discussion. What happened next would shock the nation. At 10:59 a.m., Farouk returned with his wife, Tashfeen Malik. They were armed with semi-automatic rifles and handguns. For the next 4 minutes, they systematically opened fire on Farouk's colleagues and innocent county employees. When the shooting stopped, 14 people were dead and 22 were critically injured. The FBI response was immediate and massive. This wasn't just a workplace shooting. The methodical planning, the arsenal of weapons, and the couple's backgrounds quickly pointed to something far more sinister. Federal agents labeled it domestic terrorism, launching one of the largest FBI investigations in California history. Within hours, law enforcement tracked down Farouk and Malik. A dramatic shootout ended with both attackers dead. But the investigation was just beginning. In the chaos of evidence collection, FBI agents discovered something that would become the center of a constitutional crisis: Farouk's iPhone 5C. The iPhone 5C was more than just evidence. It was potentially the key to everything. FBI investigators believed it contained critical information about the attack, communications with possible accomplices, details about planning, potential future targets, and connections to international terrorist networks. But there was one massive problem: iOS 9's encryption. Apple had implemented what they called full device encryption in iOS 8 and strengthened it in iOS 9. Every iPhone was protected by a unique 256-bit AES encryption key that was mathematically tied to the user's passcode and the device's hardware security chip, the Secure Enclave. Here's why this mattered. Even if you had physical possession of the iPhone, without the correct 4-digit passcode, the encryption made the data virtually impossible to access. And Apple had designed it this way intentionally. They couldn't unlock iPhones even if they wanted to. The encryption keys existed only on the device itself. The FBI tried everything: their best cryptographers, their most advanced forensic tools, their partnerships with intelligence agencies. Nothing worked. They even contacted NSA's elite hacking unit. The phone remained locked. But the iPhone had another security feature that made things worse. After 10 failed passcode attempts, iOS would automatically erase all data on the device. This meant traditional brute force attacks, systematically trying every possible 4-digit combination, were impossible. One mistake, and all evidence would vanish forever. FBI Director James Comey later admitted, "We have an iPhone belonging to one of the terrorists, and we haven't been able to break into it." For the world's most powerful law enforcement agency, this was an unprecedented admission of technological defeat. The question became, what could the FBI do when the most important piece of evidence in a terrorism case was locked behind unbreakable encryption? February 16th, 2016. The FBI made a decision that would reshape the privacy debate forever. If they couldn't crack the iPhone themselves, they would force Apple to do it for them. The Bureau petitioned a federal magistrate judge in California to invoke the All Writs Act of 1789, a 227-year-old law that compelled companies to assist government investigation. The court order was unprecedented in its scope and implication. Judge Sherry Pym issued the order to Apple: create a custom version of iOS that would disable security features on Farouk's iPhone 5C. Specifically, Apple would have to remove the automatic data erasure after 10 failed attempts, allow passcode attempts to be submitted electronically rather than manually, and remove delays between passcode attempts. This would enable the FBI to run a brute force attack, systematically trying all 10,000 possible 4-digit combinations until they found the right one. FBI Director Comey publicly framed this as a simple request: "We simply want the chance, with a search warrant, to try to guess the terrorist's passcode without the phone essentially committing digital suicide around us." But Apple's engineers immediately understood the terrifying implications. What the FBI was asking for wasn't just unlocking one phone. It was creating a master key that could potentially unlock any iPhone in existence. Tim Cook received the court order on a Tuesday evening. His response would define Apple's legacy and the future of digital privacy. He called an emergency meeting with Apple's top executives, legal team, and security engineers. The question on the table: would Apple comply with the government's demand? The technical reality was that Apple could create what the FBI wanted. They had the cryptographic signing keys, the iOS source code, and the engineering expertise. Creating this FBIOS, as employees nicknamed it, was technically feasible. But Cook's decision came down to something deeper than technical capability: the fundamental principle of whether any government should have the power to force companies to weaken their own security systems. On February 17th, Cook published an unprecedented open letter to customers titled "A Message to Our Customers." The letter would be read by millions and spark a global debate about privacy, security, and the limits of government power. Tim Cook's letter was nothing short of a digital declaration of independence. The FBI wants us to make a new version of the iPhone operating system, circumventing several important security features, and install it on an iPhone recovered during the investigation, Cook wrote. In the wrong hands, this software, which does not exist today, would have the potential to unlock any iPhone in someone's physical possession. Cook made it clear Apple would not comply with the court order. The letter explained Apple's position in terms everyone could understand. The government is asking Apple to hack our own users and undermine decades of security advancements that protect our customers, including tens of millions of American citizens, from sophisticated hackers and cyber criminals. But Cook went further, addressing the precedent this would set. If the government can use the All Writs Act to make it easier to unlock your iPhone, it would have the power to reach into anyone's device to capture their data. The government could extend this breach of privacy and demand that Apple build surveillance software to intercept your messages, access your health records or financial data, track your location, or even access your phone's microphone or camera without your knowledge. The response was immediate and polarizing. Privacy advocates hailed Cook as a digital hero, standing up for fundamental rights against government overreach. Law enforcement officials accused Apple of protecting terrorists and putting ideology above national security. FBI Director Comey escalated the rhetoric: "We don't want to break anyone's encryption or set a master key loose on the land. We want the chance, with a search warrant, to try to guess the terrorist's passcode." He argued that Apple was placing itself above the law, but Apple's security team knew better. Craig Federighi, Apple's senior vice president of software engineering, later explained, "There's no such thing as a vulnerability that only affects the intended target. If you create a backdoor, you create a vulnerability that bad actors, whether foreign governments, hackers, or criminals, will inevitably find and exploit." The battle lines were drawn. On one side, the FBI, backed by the Justice Department and supported by families of San Bernardino victims. On the other, Apple, supported by tech companies, privacy organizations, and millions of iPhone users worldwide. Legal experts recognize this as the most significant privacy case since the Pentagon Papers. The outcome would determine whether the US government could force technology companies to weaken their own security systems, and whether digital privacy rights could survive in the age of terrorism. The case was heading to federal court, with potentially Supreme Court implications. But behind the legal drama, both sides were preparing for a technological arms race that would reshape the entire cybersecurity landscape. March 2016 became one of the most intense months in privacy law history. The case of FBI versus Apple divided America, Congress, and even the technology industry itself. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft publicly supported Apple's position. Privacy organizations filed friend of the court briefs. On the other side, law enforcement officials, some victim families, and security hawks demanded Apple comply with the court order. The legal arguments were complex, but came down to fundamental questions. Does the All Writs Act give the government power to force companies to write code against their will? Can the government compel speech in the form of software creation? Where does corporate responsibility end and individual rights begin? Apple's legal team argued that forcing Apple to create FBIOS violated the company's First Amendment rights. Writing code, they argued, was a form of expression, and the government couldn't compel Apple to speak by creating software it opposed. The FBI's legal team countered that Apple was simply being asked to assist with a lawful search warrant, just as telecom companies were required to assist with wiretaps. They argued this was about one specific phone in a terrorism investigation, not a general backdoor. But behind the legal drama, both sides were engaged in a secret technological race. The FBI had quietly contracted with professional iPhone hackers, companies that specialized in breaking iOS security. These grey hat firms operated in a shadowy market, selling iPhone exploits to governments and law enforcement agencies worldwide. On March 21st, 2016, just one day before a crucial court hearing, the FBI made a shocking announcement. They had found a third party who could crack the iPhone without Apple's help. The method remained classified, but security experts believed the FBI had purchased an exploit from Cellebrite, an Israeli mobile forensics company. The technique likely involved a hardware-level attack on the iPhone 5C's older security chip, bypassing iOS protections entirely. On March 28th, the FBI announced they had successfully accessed Farouk's iPhone. The court case was dropped. Apple's encryption had held, but older hardware vulnerabilities had been exploited. The phone's contents? According to FBI Director Comey, there was no evidence of contact with other terrorists, no indication of additional plots, and no smoking gun that justified the constitutional crisis. The phone contained routine communications and minimal useful intelligence. The FBI versus Apple case ended without a legal resolution, but its implications reverberated worldwide. The standoff had revealed the fundamental tension between security and privacy in the digital age, and neither side had won a complete victory. Apple immediately began strengthening iPhone encryption even further. iOS 10, released months later, included enhanced security features that made the FBI's exploitation method obsolete. The Secure Enclave was redesigned with hardware-level protections that even Apple couldn't bypass. Tim Cook later reflected, "This case was never about one phone. It was about the future of privacy and security for everyone." Apple's stock price, which had initially fallen during the controversy, reached record highs as consumers embraced the company's privacy stance. But the government's position had also evolved. The FBI's successful crack of the iPhone demonstrated that absolute encryption wasn't impenetrable. Skilled hackers and dedicated resources could still find vulnerabilities in older devices and software. The case established several crucial precedents. First, it demonstrated that technology companies were willing to resist government overreach, even at significant legal and financial cost. This emboldened other firms to strengthen their own security practices and resist surveillance demands. Second, it showed that the encryption debate wasn't theoretical. It was a practical battle with real-world consequences. Every iPhone user now understood that their privacy depended on Apple's willingness to fight for it. Third, it revealed the global nature of cybersecurity. The FBI's iPhone crack likely came from Israeli technology, highlighting how privacy battles transcended national borders. The international impact was immediate. European privacy regulators strengthened their own encryption requirements. Authoritarian governments demanded similar backdoors from technology companies operating in their country. The EU began developing its own privacy frameworks that explicitly protected encryption. The FBI versus Apple case also spawned countless similar battles. Law enforcement agencies worldwide began demanding access to encrypted devices and communications. Technology companies developed increasingly sophisticated, resistant strategies, including technical measures and legal challenges. Today, the San Bernardino case is studied in law schools, computer science programs, and policy institutes as the defining privacy battle of the smartphone era. It established that digital privacy rights could survive government pressure, but only with determined corporate resistance and public support. The iPhone that started it all Farouk's iPhone 5C, became a symbol of both the power of encryption and its limitations. The device itself was eventually destroyed as part of evidence disposal procedures, but its legacy lives on in every iPhone security chip. For Tim Cook and Apple, the case proved that sometimes the most important battles aren't about profits or market share. They're about fundamental principles. The company that had once marketed itself with Think Different had proven it was willing to act differently when privacy rights were at stake. The crypto wars that began with the Clipper chip in the 1990s had entered a new phase. Technology companies had shown they would resist government encryption demands, but governments had also demonstrated they could find alternative paths to access encrypted data. As we carry increasingly powerful devices that contain our entire digital lives, the questions raised by FBI versus Apple remain more relevant than ever. Who should control the keys to our digital privacy? How do we balance individual rights with collective security? And in an age of global connectivity, who ultimately protects our digital freedom? The San Bernardino case provided some answers, but it also revealed that the crypto wars are far from over. Every new iPhone, every encrypted message, and every digital interaction continues to exist in the space between absolute privacy and total transparency that this case helped define. Behind every code, there's a human story, and sometimes those stories change the world. If this encryption battle is blowing your mind, hit the like button and let me know in the comments. Should tech companies be forced to create backdoors for governments? The debate is still raging today. The crypto wars didn't end with this case. They're still happening right now in courtrooms and boardrooms around the world. If you want to dive deeper into more incredible hacker stories like this, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're exploring the hidden battles that shape our digital world every week. What crypto war should we cover next? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next story.